The old brown coat hanging by my front door had seen better days. The sleeves were faded. One button had been stitched back twice, and the lining was torn near the pocket. I could have replaced it years ago, but I never did. Not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because that coat reminded me of something important. People often reveal who they truly are when they believe they're looking down on someone else. My name is Arthur Bennett. I'm 72 years old. To my neighbors, I'm just a quiet retiree who enjoys gardening and morning walks. Very few people know that I once spent nearly 4 decades serving my country and eventually retired as a 4-star general. When I left the military, I promised myself I would never introduce myself by my rank again. Uniforms are temporary, character isn't. Everything changed when my daughter, Emily, introduced me to her fiancé, Ethan. He was intelligent, ambitious, and successful. At first, I admired his confidence, but over time, I noticed something troubling. Ethan treated people according to what he thought they were worth. He was warm to executives, polite to wealthy friends, but barely acknowledged waiters, janitors, or cashiers. Every time he visited my house, his eyes drifted toward my old coat with a faint smile, as if he had already decided what kind of man I must be. 1 week before Christmas, Ethan invited me to his parents' house for dinner. "I'd love for you to come," he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Dress up. My parents aren't judgmental. You don't need to." His glance toward my old coat said the rest. Christmas Eve arrived, and I stood in front of my closet. Expensive wool coats hung neatly beside tailored jackets, gifts from years of service. Instead, I reached for the old brown coat. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I simply wanted to be myself. When I arrived, Ethan greeted me with a polite smile, though I noticed him hesitate as he looked at my coat. Inside, the house was beautifully decorated. His mother welcomed me warmly and carefully hung my worn coat beside several expensive designer jackets without a single expression of judgment. That small act of kindness didn't go unnoticed. Dinner was wonderful. Conversation flowed easily until Ethan began talking about success. "I've always believed," he said confidently, "that you can tell a person's future by how they present themselves. If someone stops caring about their appearance, they've probably stopped caring about life." The room fell silent. His words weren't directed at anyone, but everyone knew who they were about. I simply took another sip of coffee. Then Ethan's father slowly stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with a cream-colored envelope. He placed it in front of me. "I've waited 30 years to return this to you," he said quietly. Inside was an old photograph of a young military unit standing in front of a transport aircraft. I smiled immediately. "You kept this." "I never forgot," he replied. He turned toward Ethan. "When I was a frightened young lieutenant, General Arthur Bennett was my commanding officer." The color drained from Ethan's face. His father continued, "He taught me that people don't follow medals. They follow character. I've carried those words with me every day since." Ethan stared at me in complete disbelief. You're General Bennett." I smiled gently. "I used to be." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to meet the man, not the title." His shoulders dropped. "I judged you." "Yes," I answered calmly. "I assumed that old coat meant." "I know what you assumed." For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Ethan stood. "I owe you an apology." He looked at his parents, then at Emily, and finally at me. "I've spent years believing success could be measured by cars, houses, watches, and clothes. Tonight I realized the most accomplished man in this room walked in wearing a coat I wouldn't have looked at twice." I smiled. The coat only cost $28. A few people laughed softly, easing the tension. I walked to the front door, lifted the old brown coat from its hook, and carried it back to the table. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in Ethan's hands. "I want you to have it." He looked shocked. "I can't accept this." "You can." "I don't deserve it." "Not today," I said. "But maybe one day you will." His eyes filled with tears. "Why would you give me something that means so much to you?" "Because someday you'll understand that it's easier to buy expensive clothes than it is to earn genuine respect. When you meet someone who judges others the way you judged me, pass this coat on and tell them this story." Christmas dinner ended with hugs instead of arguments. Months later, Ethan and Emily decided to have a smaller wedding. Instead of spending thousands on decorations, they donated the money to a veterans housing charity and a local homeless shelter. At the reception, someone complimented Ethan's simple suit and asked why he hadn't worn an expensive designer jacket. He smiled and replied, "Remember how you treated them." I learned that people rarely remember what you wore. They always. Years passed, and the old brown coat hung in Ethan's study. Whenever his children asked why he kept such an old coat, he would smile, brush the dust from its shoulders, and say the same words that had changed his life forever. People don't follow medals, they follow character. And that old coat continued teaching lessons long after the medals had been packed away.